The sun dipped low in the sky as I stepped into the small, dusty shop tucked away in a corner of the historic district. The sign above the door creaked gently in the evening breeze, its faded letters barely legible. Thompson's Antiques, it read, bearing my last name, a coincidence I had found amusing when I first noticed it. I had come here looking for nothing in particular, just a way to pass the time on my day off from shooting the usual landscapes and street scenes. Little did I know, this would be the day that changed everything. The musty scent of aged wood and old leather enveloped me as I wandered deeper into the store. The light from the single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast a warm glow over shelves crammed with trinkets, tarnished silverware, and faded photographs. I could hear the faint sound of classical music drifting from an old radio in the back, its static occasionally breaking through the melody. "Can I help you with something?" The voice startled me, and I turned to find an elderly man standing behind the counter, his eyes sharp and penetrating, as if he could see right through me. "Just browsing, thanks," I replied, trying to sound casual. But there was something about the way he regarded me that sent a shiver down my spine. "Ah, browsing. A noble pursuit," he said, a slight smile creeping onto his withered face. "But be careful. Some things in here carry more than just memories." He gestured vaguely around the shop, and my gaze fell on an object covered in a layer of dust on a nearby shelf. Curiosity piqued, I approached the shelf and brushed my fingers over the surface of what appeared to be an old camera. Its leather casing was cracked, and the lens was clouded with age, but something about it called to me. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. As I turned it over, I noticed an inscription on the bottom, "For those who dare to capture the truth." "What can you tell me about this camera?" I asked, glancing back at the old man. "Ah, that camera," he said, his expression shifting to one of seriousness. "It has a dark history. Many have used it, but few have returned unchanged. They say it reveals not just images, but the essence of life and death." I scoffed a little, not wanting to believe in superstitions, but intrigued nonetheless. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Every photograph taken with that camera shows not just a moment in time, but the moment of death. Sometimes in the past, sometimes in the future. It's a burden, not a gift." I felt a chill creep up my spine at his words. It sounded absurd, like something out of a horror film. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this camera than met the eye. "And you've seen this phenomenon?" He nodded gravely. "I have. I've seen friends, family, all captured in their final moments. It's a curse, young man. If you value your life, I advise you to put it down." I hesitated, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and fascination. "What if I want to try it? Just once?" The old man's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. The camera doesn't just take pictures. It takes pieces of your soul. If you decide to use it, be prepared for what you might uncover." Ignoring his warning, I felt an irresistible urge to buy the camera. After some back and forth, I managed to haggle a price that felt reasonable. As I left the shop, the weight of the camera in my bag felt heavier than its physical form, as if it were a harbinger of the unknown. Once home, I set the camera on my cluttered desk, the late afternoon light spilling in through the window. I had my doubts, but the thrill of experimentation was too strong to resist. I grabbed a roll of film and loaded the camera, my hands trembling with anticipation. I stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, and I knew I had to capture this moment. Raising the camera to my eye, I framed the sunset. My finger hovered over the shutter button, and I felt a rush of exhilaration as I pressed it down. The click echoed in the stillness, and I lowered the camera, already envisioning the photograph that would soon reveal itself. Back inside, I carefully developed the film in my makeshift darkroom, an old bathroom I had converted for my photography hobby. The images began to emerge in the faint light of the red bulb, and my heart raced with excitement. But as the final photo came into view, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the foreground, was the beautiful sunset I had captured. but in the background, a shadow loomed, a dark figure that seemed to be reaching out towards me. It was indistinct, almost like a smudge, but the presence felt undeniable. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest. What was this? My mind raced with possibilities. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the fear creeping in. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps the film had been faulty. But deep down, a knot of unease settled in my stomach, and I couldn't quite shake it off. The next day, I decided to take the camera out again, my curiosity overriding my apprehension. There was an event in town, a local festival celebrating the town's history, and it felt like the perfect opportunity to test the camera further. I hoped to capture the joy and vibrancy of the festival, to prove to myself that this camera was just a tool, nothing more. As I arrived at the festival, the streets were alive with laughter, music, and the smell of fried food. Colorful banners swayed in the breeze, and children ran about with cotton candy, their faces painted in bright colors. I felt a surge of inspiration. I mingled with the crowd, snapping pictures of the various booths, the performers, and, of course, the people. Each click of the shutter felt exhilarating, but with every image I developed, I noticed something troubling. Each photograph revealed an aura of sadness that seemed to envelop the subjects. Smiles were present, but they felt heavy, as if the joy was merely a mask for something deeper. "Hey, Jake. You're here," a familiar voice called out. I turned to find Sarah, my childhood friend, rushing towards me. Her long brown hair danced in the wind as she approached, her face lighting up with a smile. "Hey, Sarah. Glad you could make it," I replied, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me since using the camera. "What are you up to?" she asked, glancing at the camera slung over my shoulder. "Just capturing some moments," I said casually, though I felt a twinge of guilt for not mentioning the camera's strange properties. "You should let me take a picture of you." "Oh, for sure. I love having my picture taken," she replied, striking a playful pose. I raised the camera and focused on her, the lens adjusting perfectly to frame her smiling face against the vibrant backdrop of the festival. I pressed the shutter, and the click resonated in the air, momentarily drowning out the sounds of the festivities around us. After developing the photo, I saw it again, the same heaviness in her smile, an almost imperceptible shadow lurking just behind her. It unnerved me to the core, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. "Jake, are you okay?" Sarah asked later that evening, noticing my distracted demeanor as we sat down for some food. "You seem a little off." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." "Come on, you can tell me," she pressed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Is it that camera? I saw you taking pictures all day." I hesitated, my mind racing through the images I had developed. Should I tell her the truth? What if she thought I was crazy? It's just, I feel like there's something strange about it. It shows a different side to people, you know? "What do you mean?" she asked, intrigued. I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. "It's hard to explain. The pictures capture this sadness. Almost like there's something lurking beneath the surface." Sarah's brow furrowed, and she leaned in closer. "You think it's cursed or something?" I shrugged, unsure of how to articulate my growing fears. "I don't know. Maybe. But I can't just ignore it. Let's figure it out together," she said, determination in her voice. "I've always been interested in the supernatural. Maybe we can research its history or something." I felt a sense of relief wash over me at her offer. "Yeah, that might be a good idea. I don't want to end up like one of those photos." As the sun set over the festival, casting long shadows across the ground, I knew that I had opened a door to something I couldn't fully comprehend. And with Sarah by my side, I felt a flicker of hope that we could uncover the truth behind the camera's dark past. But deep down, I knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges I had never imagined. I sat on the edge of my bed, the antique camera resting in my lap, its weight heavy with anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just an old piece of machinery, It was infused with a dark history, one that I was only beginning to unravel. The sun was setting outside, casting elongated shadows across my room, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. Deciding that I needed to share my findings with someone who might understand, I picked up my phone and called Sarah. "Hey, it's Jake," I said when she picked up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you meet me at the diner?" "Sure." "Everything okay?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "Yeah, just. I found something interesting today. I think you'll want to hear about it." "On my way," she exclaimed, and I could already picture her grabbing her backpack, her curiosity piqued. The diner was a cozy place, the kind of spot where the smell of coffee and fried food mingled in the air, creating a sense of comfort. I slid into a booth, glancing around nervously as I waited for Sarah. I could feel the camera's presence beside me, as if it were watching everyone around us. When she arrived, her face lit up with a smile. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from me. "I found this camera at the antique shop," I said, pulling it out of my bag. "But it's not just any camera. It shows something strange when you take a picture." Sarah raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well, I took a picture of the sunset earlier, and when I developed it, there was this shadow that looked like it was creeping up behind me." My voice faltered as I recalled the unsettling image. It felt wrong, like something was watching me. "That's creepy," she said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "What else did you see?" "I took pictures of some people in town too. They all had this aura of sadness around them, like something tragic was connected to them." I hesitated, uncertain about how to explain the weight of my discovery. "I think there might be a history behind this camera. Something dark." Sarah's expression shifted, her interest turning into concern. "Have you looked into it? You know, like, what it could be?" "I was hoping you'd help me with that," I admitted, feeling a surge of anxiety. "You always know where to find the good stuff in the library." "Of course. Let's go there after this." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, the weight of the camera felt lighter. We finished our meal quickly, Sarah animatedly discussing the local legends she had heard growing up. As we left the diner, her voice echoed in my ears, a soothing balm against the unease that had settled in my gut. The library was an imposing structure, its tall shelves packed with dusty volumes and secrets waiting to be uncovered. As we walked through the aisles, I felt a sense of reverence. It was a place of knowledge, and I hoped it would hold the answers we sought. "Let's check the history section first," Sarah suggested, leading the way. "Maybe there's something about the town's past that connects to your camera." We spent what felt like hours combing through old books, our fingers trailing over the spines as we searched for clues. Finally, Sarah stumbled upon a leather-bound tome that looked promising. "Here. This one's about local folklore. It might have something about cursed objects or haunted items." I leaned over her shoulder as she began to flip through the pages. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "Wait, what's this?" she said, pointing to a passage that made my heart race. "It mentions a series of unexplained deaths that have occurred in this town over the years," she read aloud. "Each death was linked to a camera that was said to be cursed, known only as the Camera of Shadows." "What does it say?" My voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "There are accounts of people who took pictures with it, only to have their lives altered in tragic ways. It seems the camera chooses its victims." Her eyes widened, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "Jake, this is serious." "Yeah, I can feel it," I replied, dread pooling in my stomach. "What if I'm next? What if the camera is already affecting me?" Sarah turned the page, her eyes scanning the text. "There's more. It mentions a photographer who owned the camera decades ago. His name was Victor Hale, and he was one of the last known victims. Apparently, his family moved away after his death, and no one has seen them since. Do you think we can find more about him?" I asked, my curiosity igniting despite the fear gnawing at me. "Absolutely. There might be something about him in the town archives, Sarah suggested, flipping through the book until she found a reference to an old newspaper clipping. Look, here's an article about his mysterious death. It says he was found in his studio, surrounded by his photographs. They say he was driven to madness. Madness? I echoed, the word hanging in the air like a dark omen. Yeah, it was like he was obsessed with the camera. He took picture after picture until, well, you know. She looked at me solemnly, the weight of the implication heavy between us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We need to find out what happened to him. Maybe there's something in his story that can help us understand how to break this curse. Fueled by our determination, we made our way to the archives, a small room tucked away in the back of the library. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of old papers surrounded us. Rows of file cabinets lined the walls, each filled with the whispers of the past. We started sifting through the archives, searching for anything related to Victor Hale. Sarah's fingers danced over the labels, her excitement palpable. Here. This cabinet has articles from the 1960s to the 1980s. Let's see if we can find something. As we pulled out the drawers, we discovered snippets of Victor's life, his early success as a photographer, the accolades he received, and then the gradual shift into darkness. Each article painted a picture of a man who was once celebrated but eventually shunned by the town. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, even though he was long gone. Then, we found it, a yellowed newspaper clipping that seemed to disintegrate in my hands. Local photographer found dead, the headline read. My heart raced as I scanned the text. Victor Hale, a once renowned photographer, was discovered in his studio last week. Friends report that he had become increasingly withdrawn, consumed by his obsession with an antique camera he acquired. Wow, this is it, Sarah said, her voice low. It sounds exactly like what's happening to you, Jake. Yeah, but it gets worse. I continued reading. Witnesses claimed that he was seen taking photographs of shadows, claiming they were the souls of those who had passed. In the days leading up to his death, he was said to have been acting strangely, talking to himself and refusing to leave his home. I looked up at Sarah, my pulse quickening. What if this camera is doing the same to me? What if I'm already losing my grip on reality? Jake, we have to be careful. You can't let it take over your life like it did with him, she warned, her eyes steady on mine. We need to understand how to deal with this before it's too late. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Let's keep digging. There has to be a way to stop this. As we continued to search, we uncovered more about Victor's family, his wife and children who vanished after his death, leaving behind only whispers of sorrow. Maybe they had a connection to the camera too, Sarah mused, her curiosity driving her forward. Or maybe they were the next victims, I replied, a chill running down my spine. We have to find out what happened to them. Just as we were about to give up, Sarah stumbled upon a small box tucked away in a corner. Inside were old photographs, the edges frayed and yellowed. Look at this, she exclaimed, her voice rising with excitement. I leaned in closer, my heart racing as I examined the images. They were haunting, capturing moments of joy and despair, but one photograph in particular caught my eye. It was a family portrait, Victor, his wife, and their 2 children, all smiling. But behind them loomed a shadow, darker than the rest of the picture, lurking just at the edge of the frame. Jake, Sarah's voice trailed off as she stared at the picture. What if that shadow is what took them? I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. We have to find out who they were. We need to know if they're still around, if they can help us. As we gathered our findings, the sense of urgency grew. The camera felt heavier in my bag, a constant reminder of the darkness that surrounded us. I glanced at Sarah, her determination shining through. Thanks for helping me with this, I said, my voice sincere. Always, she replied, a small smile breaking through her serious demeanor. We'll figure this out together. With renewed resolve, we left the library, the haunting history. The sun hung low in the sky as I stood in my dimly lit living room, the old camera resting in my hands like a forbidden artifact. The shadows danced on the walls, whispering secrets I was too afraid to uncover. I had taken a photo of Sarah earlier, hoping to capture her smile, but as I held the developed picture, my heart sank. There it was, clear as day, a vision of her death in a car accident, the image emblazoned in my mind like a brand. "Jake, are you okay?" Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to reality. She had arrived just moments ago, her face lit with concern as she stepped inside my home. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "I don't know how to explain this, Sarah. I took a picture of you, and it showed you dying in a car crash." My voice trembled, the weight of my words hanging heavily in the air between us. She stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Show me." With trembling hands, I handed her the photo. The image was startlingly vivid, Sarah, smiling, framed by the bright backdrop of the park where we had spent countless afternoons, but lurking just behind her was a dark shape, an ominous cloud that seemed to reach for her. "Oh my God, Jake," she breathed, her eyes widening as she examined the image. This is terrible." "I know," I replied, my voice rising in desperation. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, but every photo I've taken with this camera, it reveals something dark, something tragic. "I'm scared, Sarah. I don't want to lose you." She studied me for a moment, and I could see her mind racing as she processed everything. "We need to figure this out. We need to know more about the camera, where it came from. There has to be a way to stop this." Nodding, I felt a glimmer of hope igniting within me. "You're right. Let's go to the library. Maybe we can find something in the local history section. There has to be something about it." As we drove to the library, the weight of the camera on my lap felt heavier than ever. I glanced at Sarah, who was staring out the window, her face a mixture of determination and fear. I wanted to protect her, but it felt like the universe was conspiring against us. Once we arrived, we hurried inside. The scent of old books enveloped us as we made our way to the history section. I scanned the spines of the dusty tomes, my heart racing. Finally, I pulled out a thick volume titled Legends of Our Town, The Haunting of Maplewood. "Here," I called, flipping through the pages until I found a chapter titled The Cursed Camera. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, her breath hitching as she read aloud. "In the late 1800s, a photographer named Elias Hawthorne discovered a peculiar camera at an estate sale. It was said to capture not just images but the essence of life and death. Many who posed for photographs with it met untimely ends, leading some to believe it was cursed." A chill ran down my spine as Sarah continued. "Local lore suggests that each generation, the camera chooses a victim, often tied to a tragedy that occurred long ago in this very town. The last known victim was only a year ago." I felt my stomach drop. This can't be real. How could something like this exist? Sarah turned the page, her finger tracing a faded photograph of a group of people gathered in front of a crumbling mansion. "Look at this. These are the families that were affected by the camera. They all have connections to a fire that destroyed part of Maplewood over a century ago." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Do you think it could be connected to my family? My ancestors lived here, too." "Maybe," she mused, her voice quiet. "We need to dig deeper. There might be more information in the archives, like a diary or letters from those who experienced the camera's effects." With renewed resolve, we made our way to the archives, and after rummaging through boxes filled with yellowed papers and forgotten memories, we stumbled upon an old leather-bound diary. The name on the first page sent shivers down my spine, Elias Hawthorne. "Jake, this is it!" Sarah exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement and fear. "This could give us the answers we need." I gently opened the diary, revealing pages filled with neat, cursive handwriting. As I read through the entries, my heart raced. He writes about the camera's power, how it reveals not just images but the fate of those who pose for it. He describes the torment it brought upon him, the guilt of knowing the secrets of those he captured. Sarah leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. It sounds like he became obsessed with it. He tried to warn others, but was dismissed as a madman. He believed that the camera was a conduit for something darker, something that fed off the tragedies of the past. I paused, my breath hitching as I turned to the last entry. He mentions a ritual. A way to break the cycle of death tied to the camera, but it requires a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. It doesn't specify, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. But it seems like he had to confront the very essence of the camera itself. Just then, a cold breeze swept through the archives, sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced at Sarah, whose eyes were wide with fear. Jake, we need to get out of here. I nodded, the urgency of our situation crashing down on me. You're right. We have to find a way to stop this before it's too late. As we left the library, I felt the weight of the camera pressing down on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the very air around us was charged with a malevolent energy. Later that night, I sat in my room, the camera resting ominously on my desk. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen in the photo of Sarah. I picked it up again, studying it closely. Jake, she said softly from the doorway, are you okay? I looked up, meeting her gaze. I don't know, Sarah. I feel like we're in over our heads. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. We'll figure this out together. I won't let anything happen to you. I just wish I knew what to do, I admitted, my voice cracking. I can't shake the feeling that the camera is connected to something much bigger than us. Maybe we can find a way to communicate with it, she suggested. If it's a conduit, maybe we can ask it what it wants. I frowned, the idea unsettling me. You think we should try to use it again? Just once, she said firmly. We need answers. If it can show us what's coming, maybe we can prevent it. With a heavy heart, I nodded. Okay, but only if you're with me. She smiled, her courage invigorating me. I'm not going anywhere. We set up the camera in the living room, the air thick with tension. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Here goes nothing. As I pressed the shutter, the flash illuminated the room, momentarily blinding us. When the image developed, I gasped. Jake? Sarah said, her voice wavering as she leaned closer to see the photo. What stared back at us was a scene so horrifying it felt like a punch to the gut. Flames consumed a vehicle, the smoke curling into the night sky. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the image was clear, an accident, and I could tell that Sarah was in it. No! No, no, no! I cried, dropping the photo as panic surged through me. What does this mean? We have to do something. Sarah's eyes widened with fear. We need to act fast. We can't let this happen. In a frenzy, I started pacing the room, my mind racing. What if we can find a way to stop it? Maybe there's something in the ritual we can use. What if we can't? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. What if we're too late? Don't say that. I snapped, the panic turning into frustration. We can't give up now. We have to find others who have been affected by the camera. Maybe they know something we don't. She nodded, her expression steeled with resolve. Let's do it. Let's find them. But as we made our plans, I couldn't shake the image from my mind, the flames, the darkness. I felt trapped in a nightmare, and no matter how hard I tried to wake up, it only seemed to tighten its grip on my reality. The air was thick with tension as we navigated the narrow streets of the town, the sun sinking low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like fingers reaching for us. Sarah walked beside me, her brow furrowed in thought. I had shared my recent experiences with the camera, and now, the weight of its impending doom pressed heavily on my chest. I can't shake this feeling, Jake, she said, breaking the silence. There's something more to this camera than we understand. It's like it's alive, almost sentient. I nodded, my mind racing back to the images I had captured, each one revealing an undercurrent of sorrow. I know what you mean. It's as if it feeds off the despair of those it captures. But what do? We can't just ignore it. As we approached the town hall, I spotted a small group of residents gathered outside, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. They were whispering among themselves, glancing in our direction. I felt a pang of anxiety. I knew I had to face them, but I also feared their judgment. Do you think they'll listen to us? I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. They have to, she replied firmly. If we don't bring this out into the open, more people will get hurt. We need to break this cycle. With a deep breath, I led us towards the group. As we neared, the murmurs quieted, and I could feel their eyes on us like daggers. Jake! Sarah! What's going on? Asked Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had lived in the town her entire life. We need to talk, I started, glancing at Sarah for support. It's about the camera and the recent deaths. A man stepped forward, his arms crossed defiantly. What about it? You think that old junk is causing all this? You're just looking for someone to blame. Listen, Sarah interjected, her voice calm yet assertive. We've been researching the camera. There's a history of tragedy surrounding it. We need your help to understand what's happening. Several heads shook in disbelief, but a few others leaned in closer, intrigued. What do you mean? What kind of history? Mrs. Henderson pressed. It's not just an old camera, I explained, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. Every picture it takes shows more than just an image, it reveals the essence of a person. And sometimes, it shows their death. Laughter bubbled up from the skeptical man. What a load of nonsense. You expect us to believe that? People have died, and it's connected to the camera, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. We can't keep ignoring it. We need to figure out how to stop this. The murmurs resumed, but this time they were laced with fear. There's always been talk of that camera being cursed, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice trembling. But we thought it was just folklore. It's real, Sarah said, stepping closer to the group. We found a diary from a photographer, a man who used that camera decades ago. He mentioned a string of deaths. We think it's a cycle, and it's up to us to break it. The man who had dismissed us crossed his arms tighter. And how do you plan to do that? Witchcraft? Rituals? Actually, we've been looking into local history, I said, my mind racing. There might be a way to reverse the curse, but we need everyone's help. We can't do this alone. Just then, a loud crash erupted from the back of the crowd. A young woman stumbled forward, her face pale and eyes wide. You have to stop talking about the camera, she shouted, her voice laced with panic. It'll come for you. Cynthia, calm down. Mrs. Henderson urged, reaching out to her. What do you mean? I saw it. Cynthia cried, trembling. I saw the picture it took of my brother before he died. He looked so happy, but I felt something dark about it. I thought it was just my imagination, but then he was gone. The crowd shifted uneasily, and I could see the fear bubbling to the surface. We need to do something, I said, my heart racing. If we don't act, more people will get hurt. The camera isn't just an object, it's a harbinger of death. Then what do you suggest we do? The man asked, his tone softer now, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. We need to gather everyone who's been affected, Sarah said, her eyes scanning the crowd. We need to share our stories and come together. Only then can we figure out how to break this curse. I've heard of an old ritual, I continued, my mind racing with what I had read in the diary. It said that if we confront the source of the camera's power and perform a cleansing, we might be able to set things right. Like a seance, someone asked skeptically. Not exactly, I replied. But something similar. We need to connect with the spirits tied to the camera, understand what it wants from us, and offer something in return. The group exchanged uncertain glances. I could see the fear in their eyes, but there was also a flicker of hope. What do you need from us? Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice steady. Stories, Sarah said, her tone soothing. We need everyone to share what they know about the camera and any strange occurrences they've experienced. The more we know, the better prepared we'll be. As the discussion began to unfold, I felt a mix of relief and dread. We were finally addressing the issue head-on, but I knew that with each story shared, we were opening old wounds, bringing back the pain that had plagued this town for generations. "Okay, let's hear it," the man said, his arms now uncrossed, a sign of his willingness to listen. "Who wants to go first?" Some voices chimed in, sharing stories of strange occurrences and unsettling feelings tied to the camera. One elderly man recounted how his wife had insisted on having her picture taken with it, only to pass away weeks later in a tragic accident. Another woman spoke of how she had seen her best friend's face in the camera, smiling brightly, just days before she tragically lost her battle with cancer. With each tale, the weight of the camera's curse settled deeper in my chest. What if we're not just dealing with a cursed object? I wondered aloud, my voice barely audible over the collective murmurs. What if it's a manifestation of our own fears and regrets? "Jake," Sarah said softly, pulling me aside. "You're getting too deep into your own head. We need to focus on the task at hand. We can't let our doubts cloud our judgment." "I know, but what if," I hesitated, the words stuck in my throat. "Listen," she interrupted, her eyes fierce with determination. "We're going to figure this out. Together. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for everyone in this town." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for her unwavering strength. Together, we stepped back into the circle of residents, ready to face the truth of the camera, whatever it might be. As the stories continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The shadows cast by the setting sun seemed to stretch longer, creeping closer, reminding me that every moment we spent in indecision brought us closer to the inescapable fate the camera had shown me. "Tonight, we need to plan," I said, my voice steady. "We should gather at the old church. It's a place of history and healing, and it might give us the strength we need." The group murmured in agreement, and I felt a sense of urgency settle over us. "I'll bring the camera," I added, the weight of the device feeling heavier than ever. "But we need to be cautious. It may try to manipulate us." With the final stories shared and a plan in place, we parted ways, the air thick with a mix of fear and determination. As I walked alongside Sarah, I felt a sense of resolve washing over me. We were no longer just two friends trying to understand a strange object. We were part of something larger, a community bound together by a shared struggle against the darkness that threatened to engulf us. "I'll see you at the church," Sarah said, squeezing my hand before heading in the opposite direction. "Yeah," I replied, watching her go. "We'll figure this out, I promise." As I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the camera was watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal its next horrifying truth. And deep down, I knew that whatever awaited us at the church would change everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow through the window of my cramped apartment, I found myself pacing back and forth, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The weight of the camera lay heavy on my conscience, a tether to an unknown fate that threatened not just me, but Sarah as well. I could still hear the echo of her voice from earlier that day, filled with concern and determination. "Jake, we can't ignore this. We have to figure out how to stop it before it's too late," she had said, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. I could see the resolve in her expression, the fire in her spirit that had always drawn me to her since we were kids. But I also saw the flicker of terror, an understanding that we were treading on dangerous ground. I sighed, running a hand through my hair, my fingers trembling. "What if we can't, Sarah? What if the camera is just a curse waiting to claim its next victim?" "Then we'll fight it," she asserted, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "We have to find out what this camera really is and how it works. There has to be a way to break the curse." Her words resonated in my mind like a mantra, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I glanced at the camera resting on the table, its lens glinting ominously in the fading light. It felt like a living entity, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I shuddered at the memory of the haunting image I had developed of Sarah, an image that showed her fate, one I was desperate to change. After hours of research and frantic searching, Sarah and I had stumbled upon a potential lead. She had found an old, tattered book in the library that spoke of a ritual, a way to possibly undo the malediction of the camera. But the price of this ritual was steep, and it required a sacrifice. "Jake, listen," Sarah said, breaking me from my thoughts and pulling me back into the moment. I could see her determination radiating off her. "I found something in that book. It said we might be able to reverse the curse, but it involves a sacrifice. It could be something personal, a part of ourselves we're willing to let go of." "A sacrifice?" I echoed, the weight of her words sinking in. "What exactly does that mean? How do we know if it will even work?" She looked down, her brow furrowing in thought. "I don't know. But what I do know is that the longer we wait, the more danger we're in. I can't lose you, Jake. We have to do something." Her vulnerability struck me like a physical blow, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the horrors we were facing, but how could I do that when I was the one who had brought this nightmare into our lives? "I can't bear the thought of losing you either," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But what if the sacrifice is too great? What if it's something we can't come back from?" "Then we'll face it together," Sarah replied firmly, her eyes locking onto mine, unwavering. "I won't let you go through this alone. We'll figure it out." The fire in her spirit ignited something within me, a flicker of hope amidst the dread that had consumed my thoughts. I nodded, but uncertainty still gnawed at me. "Okay. We'll try it. But we need to gather everything we need for the ritual. We have to be ready." As the evening wore on, we meticulously prepared, gathering items mentioned in the book, candles, herbs, and small tokens that represented our willingness to let go. Each item felt like a weight on my conscience, a reminder of the sacrifice that loomed ahead. "Jake, we'll be okay," Sarah said, her voice softening as she placed a hand on my arm. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I believe in us." I forced a smile, but it felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. "Right. Together." The next night, we stood in my living room, the air thick with anticipation and fear. We had cleared the space, creating a small altar with the items we had gathered. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and the faint scent of herbs filled the room. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her unease. I took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "As ready as I'll ever be." We began the ritual, reciting the words from the book, our voices trembling as we chanted. With each phrase, I felt the air grow heavier, charged with an unseen energy. My heart raced, and I could see the flickering candle flames dance erratically, as if responding to the invocation. Suddenly, I felt a chill sweep through the room, and the candles flickered violently. "Did you feel that?" I asked, glancing at Sarah, who looked equally startled. "Yeah," she breathed, her eyes wide. "Keep going." We continued, pouring our intentions into the words, our hopes and fears intertwining. But then, just as I thought we might be making progress, a loud crash echoed from the window, causing us both to jump. The glass rattled, and I felt a sudden rush of anxiety. "Jake, we have to finish," Sarah urged, her voice rising above the chaos around us. I nodded, trying to focus, but my thoughts were spiraling. I could feel the weight of the camera pressing down on me, as if it were alive, aware of what we were attempting. As we reached the climax of the ritual, the room shook, and a deafening roar filled the air. I glanced at Sarah, fear reflecting in her eyes, and I knew we were on the brink of something monumental and terrifying. "Jake, hold on," she shouted, grabbing my hands tightly, anchoring me to the moment. In that instant, I felt a surge of energy rush through me, a connection forged between us that felt unbreakable. I closed my eyes, willing the ritual to work, willing the camera's curse to be lifted. But suddenly, I was pulled into a vision, a swirling maelstrom of images that flashed before my eyes. I saw Sarah, no, I sensed her, being engulfed in flames, her screams echoing in my mind. My heart dropped, a visceral fear gripping me, and I fought against the vision, desperate to change the outcome. "Sarah," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "We have to stop. I can't let this happen." "I won't let you go, Jake," she cried, her grip tightening around my hands, anchoring me as the chaos threatened to pull us apart. In that moment, I realized what I had to do. The sacrifice wasn't just about an object or a token. It was about choosing to protect the one I loved, even if it meant facing my own demise. "Sarah, I'm going to do it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "I'll sacrifice myself if it means saving you." "What?" "No, Jake, we can't." "You can't," she protested, her eyes wide with horror. "It's the only way. I can feel it. It has to be me," I insisted, an overwhelming sense of purpose washing over me. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she shook her head, but I could see the understanding dawning on her. "You can't. We can find another way." But in my heart, I knew there was no other way. The camera had chosen me, and I had to confront it. I released her hands, stepping back, ready to face whatever lay ahead. In that moment, the storm around us intensified, the winds howling and the candles flickering violently. I felt the energy shift, a palpable tension in the air. As I stepped forward, the camera lay ominously on the altar, its lens gleaming as if it were alive. I reached for it, feeling its cold, metallic surface beneath my fingers. The weight of its history pressed on me, a reminder of the countless lives it had claimed. "Jake, please," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." "I have to," I replied, my voice steady but my heart racing. "I can't let you suffer because of me. This is my choice." I lifted the camera to my eye, the world around me fading as I focused on the darkness ahead. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, as if I were stepping into the unknown with purpose. "Goodbye, Sarah," I whispered, praying that my sacrifice would break the curse, that it would save her from the fate I had seen. As I pressed the shutter, the world erupted into chaos, the storm outside raging like a tempest. I felt the camera pull me into a vision, a glimpse of a future I could no longer control. And in that instant, I knew the battle was far from over. The night air was thick with tension as Sarah and I stood outside the crumbling facade of the old mansion. The moon cast an eerie glow over the decaying structure, its windows like dark eyes staring back at us, holding secrets that had long since faded into the shadows. I could feel the weight of the camera in my pocket, its presence a constant reminder of the darkness we were about to confront. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She shifted nervously from one foot to the other, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees as if expecting them to come to life. "I mean, what if we're not supposed to be here?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "We have to know the truth," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "If there's a way to break the curse, it has to be here. Besides, we can't let whatever's happening continue. We owe it to the past, to the victims." Sarah nodded, though I could see the uncertainty etched on her face. "Okay, let's do this," she said, steeling herself. Together, we stepped through the creaking front door, which groaned in protest as if warning us to turn back. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic that sent chills down my spine. As we moved further into the mansion, I felt a strange pull. The walls were lined with faded portraits of solemn-looking people, their eyes following us as we walked. I couldn't help but wonder if they were aware of the tragedy that had unfolded in their home, of the lives that had been lost because of the cursed camera now resting in my pocket. "Jake, over here," Sarah called softly, interrupting my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in front of a large, ornate table draped with a tattered cloth. Beneath it, I could see the outline of something that looked like a shrine. "What do you think it is?" I asked, stepping closer. My heart raced as I felt an inexplicable urge to uncover the secrets hidden beneath the cloth. Sarah reached out and pulled the fabric away, revealing an altar adorned with photographs, dozens of them, each depicting a different person, faces etched with fear and sorrow. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped, her hands covering her mouth. These are the victims. I felt a lump form in my throat as I studied the images. It's like a gallery of the damned, I murmured. Each one was marked by the camera. As I turned to look at Sarah, I noticed a wooden box beside the altar. It was intricately carved, adorned with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to it. "I don't know, but it looks important," she said, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Maybe it holds the key to understanding the camera's curse." I slowly lifted the box, feeling its weight in my hands. The wood was cold and smooth, and as I opened it, I was greeted by a collection of old photographs, each one more disturbing than the last. They depicted not just the victims, but moments before their deaths, fires, car crashes, faces twisted in agony. "Jake, look at this!" Sarah exclaimed, holding up a photograph of a family. They were smiling, but the date written on the back sent a chill down my spine, April 16th, 1965. This family, they lived in our town. My heart sank as I recognized the last name. "They were the Thompsons," I whispered, my mind racing. "They were my great-grandparents." "What?" Sarah looked at me, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Are you serious?" I nodded, the reality of the situation hitting me like a wave. They died in a fire at their home. It was all over the news back then. I never knew the details, just that it was a tragic accident. Sarah's eyes widened. "But this means your family has been tied to the camera for generations. You're part of this curse." "No," I said, shaking my head vehemently. "We need to focus on finding a way to stop it. There has to be a reason why the camera chose my family." Just then, a cold breeze swept through the room, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her expression turning serious. "It's like the house is alive," she said, looking around as if expecting someone to appear. "We should be careful." I glanced back at the altar, my eyes falling on another photograph, this one showing a young woman with long dark hair, her face serene yet haunting. I felt an odd connection to her, as though she were trying to communicate something to me. "Who is she?" I wondered aloud. "I don't know," Sarah replied, stepping closer to examine it. "But she looks familiar." As she studied the photo, I noticed something peculiar. There was a date written in the corner, a date that made my stomach drop, June 21st, 1986. "That's a date of another tragedy," I said, my voice laced with dread. "One of my cousins died that day." Sarah's eyes widened in realization. "Jake, this is getting too close for comfort. What if the camera is showing us the connections? The curse is tied to your family's history." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I considered her words. "But why? What does it want from us? What does it want from me?" "I think it's trying to reveal the truth," Sarah replied, her voice steady but filled with concern. "But we have to be careful. We need to understand the full extent of this curse before we do anything else." As we sifted through the photographs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows around us seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the air grew colder. It felt as if the mansion itself was a participant in this dark play, and we were merely actors caught in its web. "Jake, look at this one," Sarah said suddenly, holding up another photograph. It depicted a man standing beside a car, a look of anguish etched on his face. The date on the back read September 14th, 2001. "That's my father," I said, my voice trembling. "He was in a terrible accident that day." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "This is all connected, isn't it? Your family's history with the camera, it's like a cycle that keeps repeating." "I can't believe this," I said, my hands trembling as I grasped the edges of the photograph. "It's like the camera has been watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike." Sarah's expression turned grave. "We need to break this cycle, Jake. We can't let it continue. The camera is feeding off this pain." Suddenly, I felt a surge of determination. We have to find out who that woman is, I said, pointing to the photo of the young woman. If she's connected to my family, maybe she holds the key to stopping this. Let's look for more clues, Sarah suggested, her voice resolute. There has to be something here that can help us understand what's happening. As we continued to search through the photographs, I felt a growing sense of dread. Each image seemed to pull me deeper into a dark history, a tapestry woven with threads of loss and tragedy. I realized that every photograph was a story, a moment frozen in time, a reminder of the lives claimed by the camera's curse. I glanced at Sarah, whose brow was furrowed with concentration. "What do you think we should do next?" I asked, feeling a mix of anxiety and urgency. "We need to find more information about the woman in the photo," Sarah replied. "Maybe there's something in the town records or the library that can help us uncover her identity." "All right, let's head back to the library," I said, determination flooding my veins. "We need to break this curse before it claims any more lives, especially ours." As we turned to leave the altar behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was alive with memories, a place where the past and present intertwined. With every step we took, I felt the weight of the camera in my pocket, a reminder of the darkness that loomed over us and the battle we had yet to face. As the shadows of the old mansion loomed over us, I felt a mix of dread and determination surging through my veins. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the floorboards echoed like a warning. I clutched the antique camera tightly, its weight heavy with the burden of its history. I had to find a way to reverse whatever curse it had cast upon us, upon Sarah. "Jake, are you sure about this?" Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts, laced with concern. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light that barely penetrated the dusty air. "What if it shows something terrible again?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. "But we have to try. We can't just sit here and wait for something to happen." "I won't let you die, Sarah." The thought of losing her sent a chill down my spine, and the urgency of the moment pushed me forward. With a deep breath, I raised the camera to my eye, focusing on Sarah's face. She wore an expression of apprehension, mixed with an odd kind of trust. I pressed the shutter, the familiar click echoing in the silence. I could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what we were doing, and for a brief second, I hoped that this time, the image would reveal a way out of our nightmare. As the photo developed before us, my heart sank. The image slowly came into focus, and I saw it, a scene of chaos and destruction. Flames licked at the edges of the photograph, and in the center, I could make out a figure that looked unmistakably like Sarah. Panic surged within me as I grasped the implications. "Jake, what is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I turned the photograph towards her, and her face paled as she took in the horrifying image. No, this can't be real. It looks like an accident," I stammered. "A fire, but I can't tell when or where." My mind raced as I tried to process the alarming vision before us. "We need to act fast. We have to figure out how to stop this from happening. What do we do?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, fear evident in her eyes. "There's got to be a way to prevent this," I replied, pacing the room, the camera swinging from my neck. "We need to find out if there's any connection to the house or the people in the town. Maybe there's a pattern we can uncover." "But how?" she pressed, desperation creeping into her tone. "Everyone in town is so afraid of the camera. They won't listen to us." "We have to convince them," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "If we can gather enough people and explain what we've found, maybe they'll help us. This isn't just our fight anymore, it's theirs too. The camera is a threat to everyone." Sarah nodded slowly, though the doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Okay, but what if they reject us? What if they think we're the ones bringing the curse?" I took a step closer, my voice firm. "We have to take that risk. If we do nothing, that fire will happen, and I can't let that be your fate. We need to find the ritual, the way to break this cycle before it's too late." As I spoke, I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me. The photograph of Sarah in flames was a warning, yes, but it was also a clue. If we could find a way to change the outcome, to alter the course of events, maybe we could save her. Let's head back to the town and gather everyone, I suggested, trying to keep the fear from my voice. We'll hold a meeting and lay everything out on the table. We'll share what we know about the camera and the history behind it. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze steadying. You're right. We can't keep this to ourselves any longer. If there's even a chance we can stop it, we have to try. With renewed resolve, we made our way out of the mansion. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed on us seemed to lift slightly as we stepped into the cool night air. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the turmoil we were facing. As we walked through the quiet streets, my mind raced with thoughts of how to reach the townsfolk. Would they believe us? Would they dismiss our warnings as mere superstition? The camera was a tool of fate, and it had already shown us how cruelly it could twist lives. When we arrived at the community center, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The building was old and worn, like the town itself, but it had seen its share of gatherings, celebrations, meetings, and now, perhaps, a desperate attempt to save lives. Inside, we found a small group of residents gathered, their faces etched with concern. As I stepped forward, I felt the weight of their eyes on me, scrutiny mixed with suspicion. Everyone, thank you for coming, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I know this isn't easy to hear, but we have something important to discuss. It's about the camera and the deaths that have surrounded it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I could see the skepticism etched on their faces. Jake, you shouldn't be messing with that thing, one man said, his voice gruff. It's brought nothing but misfortune. I understand your fears, I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. But we can't ignore what's happening. Sarah and I have seen visions of what the camera can do. It's not just a legend, it's real. And if we don't act, more lives could be lost. Jake, you're scaring people, Sarah interjected, her voice laced with urgency. But it's true. We found a photograph that shows a terrible future. We need your help to prevent it. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, and I knew we needed to present our case carefully. We believe there's a way to break this cycle, a ritual that can disrupt the camera's power. But we need everyone here to unite. What kind of ritual? A woman in the back asked, her tone skeptical. I took a deep breath, recalling the fragments of information we had pieced together. It involves elements connected to the town's history, to the victims of the camera. If we gather these elements and perform the ritual together, we can potentially free ourselves from this curse. Why should we trust you? The gruff man spoke again, crossing his arms. You're the one who brought the camera into this mess. I didn't know what it could do. None of us did. I exclaimed, frustration bubbling to the surface. But I refuse to stand by while more people suffer. I'm asking you to give us a chance, to fight this together. Another murmur spread through the crowd, and I could feel the tide shifting, just slightly. What do we have to lose? A young woman spoke up, her voice trembling but resolute. If there's any chance we can save lives, we have to try. I seized the moment, my heart pounding. Exactly. We need everyone's support. We can't let fear keep us from facing this. Slowly, more people began to nod, the spark of hope igniting amidst the gloom. All right, Jake. We'll listen, the man finally said, his posture relaxing slightly. But if this goes south, don't say we didn't warn you. Thank you, I breathed, relief flooding through me. We'll need to gather supplies and research the specifics of the ritual. Every bit of information helps. As we began discussing the next steps, I felt a sense of camaraderie building among us, a collective determination to confront the darkness that had descended upon our town. But in the back of my mind, the haunting image of Sarah in flames lingered, a reminder of the urgency we faced. The meeting continued late into the night, filled with theories, ideas, and the occasional voice of doubt. But as we shared our fears and desires, I felt the weight of the camera lessening, just slightly. We were no longer alone in this fight, we had each other, and together, we would face whatever horrors awaited us. As I glanced at Sarah, I could see the resolve in her eyes, a fire that mirrored my own. We would break the curse, and with every ounce of strength we had, we would fight for our futures. The air was thick with tension as I stood at the front of the town hall, my heart pounding in my chest. The wooden floor creaked beneath me as I shifted my weight from one foot to another, the flickering overhead lights casting long shadows across the room. I glanced at Sarah, who stood beside me, her expression a mix of determination and fear. We had gathered the townsfolk under the pretense of discussing the recent tragedies, but deep down, I knew what we had to address, the cursed camera. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice shaky but firm. "I know this is a difficult time for all of us, especially after the death of Mr. Henderson last week. But we can't ignore the connection that's been haunting our town." I paused, searching the faces in the crowd. Some were familiar, others were strangers who had moved here recently. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright skepticism. The camera, it's not just an old relic. It's a harbinger of doom. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. I could see Mrs. Thompson, a local historian, shaking her head in disbelief. "Jake, you can't seriously think that old camera is responsible for these deaths," she called out, her voice tinged with indignation. "Why not?" I shot back, unable to contain my frustration. "Every time I take a photo, it reveals something terrible. Just look at what happened to Sarah. I saw her death in one of those pictures." Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but urgent. "I know it sounds crazy, but we need to consider the evidence. The camera is tied to the history of this town, and it's linked to a series of tragedies. We need to face this head-on. If we don't, more lives will be lost." "Lives lost," a man from the back shouted. "What do you know about loss, Jake? You're the one who brought this cursed object into our town." His words stung. I clenched my fists at my sides. I didn't know what it was when I found it. I was just a photographer looking for something interesting. It's not my fault that this camera has a dark past. The room erupted into chaos, with voices clashing as people argued. I could feel my pulse racing, the heat of anger and desperation flooding through me. Sarah reached out, placing a hand on my arm, grounding me. "Everyone, please," she cried. "This isn't helping. We need to work together if we want to stop this. We can't let fear divide us." Some faces softened at her words, but others remained resolute. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, and just as I thought I might lose them completely, a loud bang echoed through the hall. The door swung open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Mr. Jenkins, a respected local elder, his face drawn and weary. "I've heard enough," he said, his voice cutting through the disarray. Everyone turned to face him, the room suddenly quiet. "We can't ignore what's happening. I've seen the effects of the camera myself. My own brother was one of its victims. I thought it was just a story, but the more I hear, the more I realize how deep this goes." "Then you believe us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he nodded solemnly. "And I think we need to take action. I've gathered some old records from the library about previous incidents linked to that camera. There's a pattern: every generation, someone is chosen, and the deaths are always tied to tragedy." I exchanged a glance with Sarah, the weight of those words settling heavily on my shoulders. "What do you propose we do?" I asked, my mind racing. Mr. Jenkins stepped closer to the front. "We need to confront this head-on. There are rituals mentioned in the old texts that might help us break the curse. But we'll need everyone's cooperation. We can't do this alone." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but I could also see the hesitation in their eyes. Fear was a potent force, and the townsfolk were torn between skepticism and the instinct to protect their own. "Will you join us?" Mr. Jenkins continued, his voice steady. "We need to come together as a community. If we don't take a stand, the consequences could be dire." I could feel the energy in the room shift, a fragile sense of unity beginning to form. "We can do this," I said, finding my voice again. "We have to believe that we can change our fate. If we don't, then we're just waiting for the next tragedy to strike. A woman in the front row raised her hand. What do we need to do? First, we need to gather the items for the ritual, I replied. We'll need some personal items from the victims' families, as well as candles and herbs. We'll set a date to perform it together, and we must all be willing to confront the darkness. What if it doesn't work? Someone else asked. What if we just make it worse? We can't let fear dictate our actions, Sarah interjected. We've already seen the consequences of inaction. If we don't try, we'll never know. The room buzzed with renewed energy as people began to nod in agreement. I could see the resolve forming in their expressions. We were no longer just individuals, we were a community facing a common threat. Just as I thought we had turned a corner, a chilling sound cut through the air, a shrill scream from outside the hall. Panic erupted, and the crowd surged toward the doors. What was that? I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the chaos. We rushed outside, the night air biting at our skin. Under the streetlights, I saw a group of people gathered, their faces pale and horrified. I pushed my way through the throng, my heart racing with dread. It was Mr. Henderson's daughter, kneeling beside the lifeless body of her father. The sight was horrific. His face was twisted in fear, as if he had seen something unimaginable in his final moments. No! Not again! I heard someone cry out, and a collective gasp echoed through the crowd. I knelt beside her, trying to process the reality of what I was witnessing. What happened? I asked, my voice shaking. He was just walking home, she sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was fine one moment, and then he just collapsed. I felt sick to my stomach, the weight of despair crashing down on me like a tidal wave. This is it, I whispered to Sarah, who stood beside me, her expression a mixture of horror and disbelief. We have to act now. As the townsfolk gathered around us, I felt the anger rising within me. We can't ignore this anymore. I shouted to the crowd. This is what I was talking about. This camera is killing us. We have to take a stand, and we have to do it now. The murmurs began again, but this time they were different. There was a sense of urgency, a willingness to confront the nightmare that had taken hold of our community. Let's meet tomorrow, I said, my voice steadying with purpose. We'll gather the items needed for the ritual, and we'll make a plan. We owe it to Mr. Henderson and everyone who has been lost to this curse. As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a spark of hope amidst the fear. We were united now, bound by the tragic events that had unfolded. I turned to Sarah, who looked both determined and scared. Are you ready for this? I asked, my voice low. I have to be, she replied, her eyes fierce with resolve. For everyone who's been lost. I nodded, knowing that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The camera had brought darkness into our lives, but together, we had the power to fight back. It wouldn't be easy, but we had to try. The chill of the night air wrapped around me as Sarah and I stood in the dimly lit room, surrounded by the artifacts of a time long gone. The shadows of the old mansion seemed to breathe with a life of their own, whispering secrets that were better left unspoken. The camera, the cursed object that had drawn us into this nightmare, lay heavy in my hands, its weight pressing down on my resolve. Are you sure about this? Sarah's voice broke through the silence, filled with an undercurrent of fear and determination. Her breath was visible in the cold air, a reminder of the urgency that hung over us. Honestly? No. I replied, my voice shaking slightly as I glanced at the antique altar we had hastily assembled. But if we don't try, we might lose everything. I can't let it take you, Sarah. Not after everything we've been through. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of anxiety and courage. I know. I just wish we had more time to figure this out. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. We don't have time. The camera, it's already shown us what could happen. We need to do this now. We had gathered the elements for the ritual, a few candles, a bowl of salt, and some herbs I had found in an old book at the library. They felt insignificant compared to the weight of the camera and the history it carried. I placed everything on the altar, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged the items. "Do you remember what we read?" I asked, trying to focus. "We need to light the candles and chant the incantation 3 times. Then we can confront the camera." Sarah stepped closer, her fingers brushing against mine as she lit the first candle. The flickering flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the dust motes that floated like trapped memories. "I just hope this works," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," I replied, trying to mask the fear in my own voice. "We don't have any other choice." As the last candle was lit, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around us. The air thickened, charged with an energy that was both unsettling and exhilarating. We joined hands, the warmth of her grip grounding me as we prepared for the unknown. "On 3, I said, my heart racing. 1, 2, 3. In unison, we began to chant the incantation, our voices echoing in the stillness of the mansion. The words felt foreign on my tongue, yet somehow familiar, as if they were awakening something deep within the walls. The room began to vibrate, the candles flickering wildly as the temperature dropped sharply. The camera on the altar began to shake, a low rumble resonating through the floorboards. I could feel the darkness coiling around us, as if it were alive, feeding off our fear. "Jake!" Sarah shouted, her voice strained. "Keep going," I urged, my eyes locked on the camera. "We have to finish." With each repetition of the incantation, the shadows grew darker, swirling around us like a storm. I could hear whispers, indistinct and haunting, echoing in my ears. They were warning us, taunting us, but I couldn't focus on that now. I had to concentrate on Sarah, on the ritual, on breaking this curse before it consumed us both. Suddenly, the camera exploded with light, blinding me momentarily. I squinted against the brightness, and when my vision cleared, I saw the image from the camera forming in the air above the altar. It was a scene of chaos, flames licking at the edges of a familiar building, our town's old library, engulfed in fire. "No!" I shouted, panic surging through me. "It can't be." "Jake, what is it?" Sarah's voice trembled, her grip tightening around my hand. "It's the library. We have to stop this." I felt the weight of dread settle into my stomach. This is what's coming if we don't finish the ritual. The air crackled with energy, the shadows swirling more violently. I could feel the camera's presence, an oppressive force trying to pull us into its depths. "We need to finish," I yelled, desperation creeping into my voice. "Keep chanting," Sarah cried, her eyes wide with fear. We pushed through the incantation, our voices rising above the chaos that surrounded us. The shadows began to rise, as if they were alive, responding to our words. I could feel the power shifting, the energy in the room growing stronger with each repetition. Then, in a flash of blinding light, I was thrown back, landing hard on the wooden floor. Dazed, I struggled to sit up, and my heart sank when I saw Sarah still standing at the altar, her face contorted in concentration. "Sarah!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. "Get away from the camera!" But she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the camera, a strange light reflecting in them. "Jake, I can feel it," she exclaimed. "It's trying to tell me something." "No! Focus on the ritual," I yelled, but my voice felt distant, as if I were shouting through water. Suddenly, the camera emitted a piercing sound, a high-pitched wail that reverberated through the room. Sarah gasped, her body trembling as she struggled to maintain her composure. "I can see it, Jake. I can see the past, and the future. Sarah, please," I begged, fear clawing at my throat. "You have to come back to me." In that moment, I felt a surge of determination. I raced towards her, grasping her shoulders and forcing her to look at me. "You're stronger than this. We can beat it together." Her eyes flickered as she focused on me, and I could see the fear slowly dissipating. "You're right," she whispered, her voice steadier. "We can't let it win." We turned back to the altar, our voices uniting once more as we chanted the incantation. The camera shook violently, the energy in the room reaching a fever pitch. Shadows clawed at the edges of our vision, but we pressed on, determined to finish what we had started. The light from the camera intensified, blinding me once more. I squeezed Sarah's hands tightly, feeling her warmth against the cold grip of the darkness. "We can do this!" I shouted, the words fueled by our shared resolve. Then, without warning, a violent force pulled us apart, and I was thrown to the ground once more. I struggled to regain my footing, panic flooding my senses as I searched for Sarah. She was still at the altar, the camera now hovering above the altar, glowing ominously. "Sarah!" I cried, my heart racing as I reached out for her. "I can't hold it," she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. "It's too powerful." I felt the darkness closing in, wrapping its tendrils around me, but I refused to let it take her. "You can do this. Just focus on me." With every ounce of strength I had, I pushed myself up and charged toward her, the shadows clawing at my heels. I grabbed the camera, feeling its cold metal against my skin, and turned it towards us, hoping to channel our combined energy into a single powerful force. "Together!" I shouted, and we began to chant once more, our voices rising above the storm of chaos surrounding us. With one final surge of strength, we finished the incantation, our voices echoing against the walls of the mansion. The camera erupted in a blinding flash, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, as the light began to fade, I felt a rush of energy wash over us. The shadows retreated, and the oppressive weight that had burdened us began to lift. I looked around, disoriented, and saw Sarah's face, illuminated by the remaining candlelight, filled with hope. "Did we do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I replied, my heart racing as I glanced around the room. The darkness had receded, leaving behind a sense of calm. But then, in the depths of my mind, I felt a lingering doubt. The camera still lay between us, and I knew this battle was far from over. As the ritual reached its peak, my heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum. I could feel the energy in the air shifting, swirling around us like a tempest. Sarah stood beside me, her eyes wide with fear and determination, her hands trembling as she clutched the items we had gathered, the old photographs, the candles, the herbs that the townsfolk whispered about, ingredients for a desperate hope. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that seemed to seep through the walls of the dilapidated mansion. "Are you sure about this? We don't know what will happen." I turned to her, trying to mask the uncertainty swirling inside me. "We have to try, Sarah. If we don't do this, that camera, it'll keep taking lives. It has to end here." "But what if it goes wrong?" she pressed, searching my face for answers. "What if one of us—" "Trust me," I interrupted, my voice firm despite the doubt gnawing at my insides. "We can't let fear control us. We're fighting for our lives, for everyone who's been hurt by this curse." The storm outside raged on, thunder rumbling like the growl of some ancient beast, but I could feel an even more ancient force stirring within the house. Shadows flickered along the walls, and I could almost hear the whispers of the past, urging us to stop, to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the camera in my pocket, its presence like a dark cloud hovering over us. "We need to complete the ritual before it's too late." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. Together, we placed the treasures on the altar, a makeshift arrangement of stones and wood we had cobbled together. The air thickened with a palpable tension, and I could see her breath coming in quick bursts, each puff visible in the frigid air. "Let's do this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath and centering myself. "Great spirits of those who came before us, we seek your guidance. We wish to break the cycle of death and despair. We offer our intentions, our courage," and I felt a sudden jolt, as if the very fabric of reality shifted around us. The camera vibrated violently in my pocket, and I reached for it, pulling it out against my better judgment. The moment I held it in my hands, I was transported into a vision, a sight so vivid it felt like I was living it. Flames engulfed Sarah. I could see her face twisted in terror, the fire dancing hungrily around her, consuming everything I loved. No! I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the flames. I tried to reach for her, to pull her out of the inferno, but I was paralyzed, rooted in place by an unseen force. Jake! Sarah's voice broke through the chaos. Jake, come back! You can't let it take you. I fought against the vision, clawing my way back to reality. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, the memory of the flames still searing my mind. Sarah! I shouted, panic rising in my throat. I saw you. I saw you burning. Her face paled as she took a step back. What? No! We can't let that happen. I can't lose you, I said, desperation clawing at my insides. I turned the camera in my hands, suddenly realizing the truth. The camera, it wants to take someone. It's chosen you, and I won't let that happen. Jake, we're in this together. We can figure this out. Her eyes were pleading, but I could see the fear lurking beneath her brave facade. I shook my head, the weight of my decision settling heavily on my shoulders. No. I need to do this. If I sacrifice myself, maybe that will break the curse. Maybe you can live. Don't say that, she cried, grasping my arm tightly. We can find another way. We can figure this out together. But deep down, I knew that the camera wouldn't let us go that easily. It thrived on fear, on despair, and on sacrifice. I took a deep breath, the storm outside howling as if the universe itself were trying to warn me. I have to do this, Sarah. You have to trust me. But Jake, I cut her off, my voice rising above the tempest. No. If this is what it takes to save you, then I'll do it. I won't let that camera take you. I refuse to be a pawn in its game. Tears filled her eyes, and I could see the agony of my decision reflected in her gaze. Jake, you please. I placed my hands on her shoulders, grounding her in the moment. Promise me you'll live. Promise me you'll find a way to break this curse, even if it means living without me. Jake, don't say that. We can fight this together. She shook her head, her voice trembling with emotion. I looked into her eyes, the depth of our shared history swirling between us. I love you, Sarah. And I will always love you. That's why I have to do this. With a heavy heart, I turned back to the altar, feeling the weight of the camera pressing against my palm. I raised it towards the sky, feeling the power of the storm surge around me. Spirits of the past, I offer myself as a sacrifice. Let my life end so that her life may continue. The camera vibrated violently, a whirlwind of energy swirling around us as the shadows thickened and the storm intensified. I felt the air crackle with electricity, the very essence of the universe responding to my plea. I am ready. I shouted, my voice mingling with the thunder. Take me. In that moment, I was engulfed in darkness, the world around me dissolving into a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and shadows. I felt myself being pulled, my consciousness stretching beyond the boundaries of time and space. I could see glimpses of Sarah, her face twisted in anguish, but I could also see the shadows of the past, the victims of the camera, their eyes pleading for release. Suddenly, I was back in the mansion, my body trembling as the energy surged through me. I felt lighter, as if I was shedding the weight of my existence. Jake! Sarah screamed, reaching for me, but I could feel myself slipping away. Live, Sarah! I called out, my voice echoing in the void. Break the cycle! With one final surge of energy, I felt the camera shake violently in my hand. The shadows around us trembled, and then, with a deafening roar, the storm erupted. A blinding light enveloped me, and I felt myself being torn apart, piece by piece, until all that remained was the echo of my love for her. When the storm subsided, I found myself in a vast emptiness, floating in a sea of stars. I could see her, a distant figure bathed in light. Sarah stood there, her face illuminated with hope and sorrow, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jake, she cried, reaching out for me, but I knew I was beyond her grasp. I'm here, I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me. I'll always be here. The scene shifted, and I was suddenly back in the mansion, watching from the shadows as Sarah clutched the camera to her chest. She looked broken, the weight of grief heavy on her shoulders. "Jake," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but I was trapped in this ethereal space, unable to bridge the gap between us. I watched as she revealed the camera, and a new photo slowly developed, my face, smiling, but in the background, dark shadows loomed, creeping closer and closer. "No," I breathed, the horror of the vision crashing over me. "Not again." Sarah stared at the photograph, her expression shifting from sorrow to determination. "I won't let this continue," she said fiercely, her voice echoing in the chamber. "I'll find a way to stop this. I promise you, Jake." And in that moment, I knew, though I may have sacrificed myself, my love for her would always remain. She would fight, and she would find a way to break the curse, to free herself from the camera's grasp. I could feel her strength, her resolve radiating through the darkness, and I held on to that hope like a lifeline. As the shadows crept ever closer, I whispered one final promise into the void. "I'll always be with you, Sarah. You're never alone." And with that, the darkness enveloped me once more, leaving me with the bittersweet knowledge that while I was gone, our story was far from over.